Hello. The video that follows describes Visual Basic for Applications code that adjusts the clear column of the Excel Power Query checkbook transactions table. It demonstrates list objects, the means with which VBA deals with Excel tables, and shows filter table adjustments involving only visible cells. It also gives an example of the new Excel filter function. I hope you'll find it useful.
This is the 6th video in the Excel Power Query Checkbook series. And once the bank statements have been reconciled, the transactions worksheet has to be updated to recognize the balance statement. Before I do that, I want to revisit the Queries and Connections section, the panel. We can see that we've got our groups for credit card 2 and categories. I'm going to make a group for the reconcile queries as well. We'll go ahead and group them to a new group. We'll call it reconcile. And bank balance as well. And that brings our queries in a little more order. And we're ready to move on to updating the transactions worksheet. That'll have to be done through a Excel macro, a VBA macro, because you want to keep all the formulas in the transaction sheet. And if we were to try to append a Power Query table, we wouldn't be able to do that. The macro steps are really pretty straightforward. There are only two of them. One, filter the transactions table to include items cleared in the reconciled bank statement. And two, replace C in the cleared column of the filter table with the abbreviation of the reconciled month. We'll also check to make sure the user actually wants to do the update. But those are the two main activities of the macro. So let's start the macro by going to the Developer tab and the Visual Basic Editor. And let's insert a new module. And we'll name this module Reconcile. We'll put in some dimension statements just so that we'll have our variables covered. And now we'll call this sub update transactions. Now the first thing to do is set some variables for the worksheet objects. And we're going to use WS1 is going to be the transactions worksheet, and WS2 will be the reconcile worksheet. Next, we want to get the reconciliation date. So that comes from the TBL STMNT, and we're going to get the month from the first column, first row, and the year from the first row, second column. And that will store both the month in the rmonth variable and the year in the YR variable. So now we'll start determining if the user actually wants to update the transactions worksheet. We'll put in a series of messages and a message box. So let's go ahead and do that. We have the message here, the RM message, with the reconciliation month is the R month of the year, to confirm with the user that we're going to update that month and year. We can see the message box will deliver some output into the variable response. If the user presses the yes button of the message box, then response will equal VBS. And if the no button is pressed, it'll be VB no. So let's go ahead and use a method of determining what code to execute depending on the user's choice. We'll put the code here, and we'll start with a select statement. So the select case, and we'll target the response. If it's VBS, we execute our code. If it's VBNO, we will exit the subroutine after putting a message box saying we're going to exit the macro. So here, we're going to get the closing date for reconciliation, and that's in the range STMT end. So put that in variable bank close, and then BCS will be the variable that will hold a string, which will be less than or equal to the date of bank close. That allows us to filter the table only to those dates that are less than or equal to the ending date of the month. And then MONABB will put the first 3 characters of the month that sits in our month into a variable to allow us to replace the C's that are in the clear column. The transaction sheet table is named TBL check, and we're going to set that table to that WS1 list object of table check. That allows us to work with the table in the transactions worksheet just by using the variable TBL. And here's really our first significant code filtering the transaction table. So with the range of data that is in the table, we're going to use the autofilter command, and the first criteria will be dates that are less than or equal to the ending date of the month. And then the second criteria over in the cleared column will be the C's. So when the table is filtered, we'll only have C's in the clear column, and all the dates will be less than or equal to the ending date of the month. Once the table is filtered, we're going to work on the visible data in the clear column. We set a range for that data, and then we just make the value the month AB 3-character designation of the month, and we put that in every cell. The show all data will return the table to the unfiltered state, and that's all that happens. When the case is VBNO, as I've mentioned before, we have a message box of exiting the macro, and we exit the subroutine. And once the user gives permission to execute the code, then all of the C's in the transaction table within the month that was reconciled will be changed to the 3-character abbreviation of the reconciled month. So let's close this window and run the macro and see if it works. That will be our macro update transactions and run. We have the message box. It's going to make changes to the clear column of the transactions worksheet. And the cell in G5 is 0. Let's continue. And now let's go look at the transactions worksheet. We can see we no longer have the C's, but we have the AUG, the August replacement of the C's, in the clear column. Before leaving the transactions worksheet, let's make a slightly more elegant and certainly more versatile calculation of the bank balance as seen by the bank. And that's up here in the current bank balance. We have 2 sum-if statements, and the reason why we needed 2 instead of using a sum-ifs is because we were using the table clear column as the filtering table in both instances. But with Office 365, the new filter function offers us a more powerful way of doing that. And we'll just do that for demonstration purposes. So let me take out the 2 sum-ifs. And we start with a sum, and we're going to sum a filtered column, a filtered amount column, based on the ability of the filter function to determine how the column will be filtered. So if we put the sum of the filter, and the filter we're going to do the table check table, and the column we want filtered is the amount. And what are we going to include? We're going to include the length greater than 0 of anything in the clear column. That way, it'll pick up our 3-character months, it'll pick up the C's, it'll pick up anything that we've marked in the clear column, which also allows us more versatility in how we mark items that the bank has cleared before we reconcile. But let's just use the more elegant. The len, which is not available in a sum if, the len function for table check. So we measure the length of table check clear column. We just want it to be greater than 0. So something that's essentially in the clear column, and it will use that row in its calculation. And then what happens if it returns an empty table? We'll just have a 0 in there. Whoop, 0. And close off the sum. And that should give us exactly the same, 3,000 something, 3,500. Yes, same calculation, but more versatile. And the filter function is really a quite powerful addition to the newer Excel functions. Before we leave the reconcile process, we'll put a couple of reminders in the reconcile sheet so that we don't accidentally update transactions that shouldn't be updated. So to do that, we'll merge and center a couple of cells here. We'll merge and center here for one message, and here for another. So in this message, we'll make sure that we have dates that are appropriate to the month involved. So we'll put in a statement here. If the max of this table, which is B&K reconcile, so if the maximum date is less than B4, which is the beginning date shown, then we'll put the message update reconciliation table. Otherwise, it'll be blank. And enter it. And as we can see, we have dates that are appropriate. But if we put this in September, it'll say update reconciliation table for target month. And then also, let's make sure we don't update the transactions when the bank statement isn't balanced. So another if statement here. If G5 does not equal 0, then put in G5 does not equal 0. Do not update. Otherwise, put in G5 equals 0. Bank statement balanced. And we'll put that in. So if we weren't balanced, so let's arbitrarily put a 6 in here, we can say G5 does not equal 0, do not update, and I'll take that out. Okay, and the only other thing to do, I think, would be to put this in colors so we get it to be, let's make it red. Where's our text that contains? And we're going to format this to update. So if it contains update, let's do a custom format. Red fill, white font. Okay. And here, we'll go with not. So let's go ahead and do the same thing. Conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, text that contains, if it contains a not, then same deal, custom format, red fill, white font. Click OK. So let's go ahead and once more put something in here, and we'll get rid of it. So that's it. If we move back to August, we should be able to get rid of the update reconciliation table. And that gives us some reminders. And that's it for the reconciliation of the bank statement. We'll next deal with breakdown of expenses.